Good morning, everybody. This is Sales Chatter. I'm your co-host, Ryan Mohammed. This is the only logistics podcast with the mission of getting 10,000 reps to hit a million GP. I've got my amazing co-host, President and CEO of RGTX Logistics, Jeff Dickinson. How you doing this morning, brother?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. And we got Dean, my favorite day of the week. So let's get started,
Mine
guys.
too.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Beautiful. I gotta say, gents, I love it's obviously being the new year. Like Jeff has been dressing up really nice. He's looking pretty handsome with his new shirts on the past 2 days. Dean's got the new background going on. It looks like it's a new light and things like that. So this 2023, it's looking amazing for everybody. So kudos to you guys, man. How's everything going with everyone?
Yeah, good. Good to be with you. I mean, this is my first time in the new studio, so I'm still experimenting with lights and the backdrop.
Looks good. It does look good.
I bought a highway mural, 8 foot by 6 foot, to put behind me. So my head will be right in the middle of interstate, can't remember, but it'll be a highway going out into the distance behind me. So we could have a good look next week.
Is that going to be Highway 91 by any chance?
No, it's a bright sunny day. I think, is that what you're getting at? No. So yeah, I'll try to brighten up the studio here.
Nice. Did you get a new camera or something? Because I mean, you're crisp. You're really crisp.
Yeah, I lashed out and bought one of those rings that you put behind your camera that all the famous social media people use. So it's actually brightened up things a little bit. So
yeah, Jeff Dean's actually bought it for the purpose of doing like TikTok dances, with the grumpy Pete on his TikTok account. He's stopping off at truck stops and doing the TikTok dances.
I am going to get that. What do you call it? I'm going to subscribe to that channel for sure.
Yeah. Good there. So, Dean, we want to definitely, it's obviously first week of brand new year, but I think it's a good time to reflect on where did the data end up for last year, for 2022. So with Christmas and everything like that kind of going on, we had our episodes, so on. What can you tell us? Basically closing to 2022.
Yeah, one of the things that, thanks, Ryan. One of the things that got my attention last week, and we've talked about this on the show a lot, that we're seeing a lot more volume in the spot market historically, certainly in the last 3 years for obvious reasons, more so last year than we'd ever seen before. But that trend has continued, right? So we've had a lot of talk about, the market's imploding and rates are crashing. Well, spot rates have certainly dropped. There's no question about that. Spot market volumes have certainly dropped. But historically, the data point that I'm kind of fascinated by was that last week, our load post volumes, which is sort of our proxy for, volume in the market, load posts were up last week. Again, no great surprise that volumes were up slightly. Compared to this time last year, though, they were down 40%. Now, again, comps to 2021, questionable at this time of the year, because this time last year, of course, we were in the middle of all that madness. But the volume of load posts last week, so it's a 4-day week. And if my calendars are right, the last 2 years were also 4-day weeks between Christmas and New Year. So a 4-day week, obviously, you have less volume. But if you look at the last 3 years, you get a good sense of where we're at. And the volumes last week were the second highest in the last 6 years, only eclipsed by last year. So that's the volume of freight moving in the spot market. And now, of course, the reason for the downward pressure on spot rates is the number of carriers posting their loads on our load boards, searching for work, right, is still at their highest level in 6 years. So that gives you a sense of where demand, supply and demand sort of sits in the spot market. But I think the data point that was really interesting, if you think about, where rates are heading, rates certainly started to go up a little bit last week. They ended at just over $2 a mile, excluding fuel. That's at a whopping 75 cents a mile lower than this time last year. But again, going back to pre-pandemic years, it's still 23 cents a mile higher for the final shipping week of the year compared to pre-pandemic years. And when you look at our year-over-year chart that we show on our weekly show, which we're back on the air next Tuesday, you'll see what this year-over-year line chart looks like. And you'll see this purple line compared to the orange and reds. We're still at the second highest level for spot rates in the last 6 years also, in addition to the load post being very high. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's good volume in the spot market. And this is sort of where I think I'd love to get Jeff's take on this. We are clearly seeing shippers take advantage of more volume, lower rates in the spot market, moving freight over to lower their procurement costs. More transactional loads are moving maybe on lower volume lanes. So we're seeing the data point I've been watching is the spread between contract and spot. So it was out to, and I did just look at the maths this morning, the spread has been out, when I look at rate view, the spread has been out to, from April last year, all the way through to January, there was a really significant spread between contract and spot. It's only just starting to close now in December and early January. It was as high as 65 cents per mile. It's now down to 45 cents a mile. So the spread is closing. So what that tells me is, even though contract rates are coming down, which represent probably 95% of the freight, there's more volume going into the spot market because of the lower rates, and over time that will lift spot rates, because the relationship between capacity and demand will put upward pressure on spot rates. That's typically what drives the next freight cycle up. So again, early stages of the year, but that's kind of where the year ended. The spread had closed, volumes are up historically. Rates aren't that bad for carriers. I know some guys on social media were, talking about some lanes, like, flatbed loads from Portland to Oklahoma City were $1.21 a mile. Well, it's a very low volume lane. But when you look at Oklahoma City outbound rates, they're up around $3 a mile. So you can see carriers taking a lower rate to get to Oklahoma City to take advantage of outbound loads that are much higher. When you look at the total, miles over the end of the week, drivers are still in that range of where break even is, in that sort of $80 to $2 a mile. So despite all the headlines of doom and gloom throughout the year, we just didn't see it. People have always got to remember that 75% of freight moves under 100 miles. And, it's only a small percentage that moves long haul in the spot market, albeit a very big number when you think about the whole American truckload economy. Most people are doing really well, especially the ones that I talk to that run regional, dedicated, short haul, back and forward, predictable type work where the contract rates are fairly sustainable. But I think, Jeff, that I was really looking forward to talking to you this morning about what we're seeing, which is shippers more and more now appear to be taking advantage of lower rates in the spot market to move those contract loads. I think more so on low volume lanes as opposed to their high volume lanes.
Yeah, and it's funny. Let's reflect on a conversation we had not so long ago, when precisely you and I discussed about what's going to happen in the spot market and what's going to affect the contract. And sure enough, you see that suck coming down, that vacuum, and it's starting to come down. Now, let's ride the double-edged sword here, right? Sure, the shippers are taking advantage of the lower rates in the spot market, but what about their contractual agreements that they have with their carriers, right? Or that they may have done. A lot of them have done last year to prepare for this year, with the negotiations, with getting the right carriers on the right lanes and everything. Now, it's very risky, at least the way I look at it, because they're not loyal to those carriers, and they're going where the money is. And so, right, I mean, you can see that they're pulling it. They're going to that spot market. So that's why I said RFPs, and I said it so many times, you heard me, they're worthless right now. You can't get a long-term one because there's so much volatility in the market, right? We're seeing the fuel is starting to come up now. In New Jersey, we're seeing that like 20-something cents over the last couple of weeks. It was that like 307, and now it's well above that. So I mean, we're seeing a lot of that in the market. I know I'm not just seeing it. I'm sure that you're seeing it as well, and a lot of other people, but I don't think it's the right way. I think what shippers should do is that they should go back to, if they use a lot of brokers or if they use the assets carriers out there, let's sit down. Let's have another discussion. We want to keep you in our corral. How can we do that? Can you bring those rates down? I've had that trust me, I've had that conversation on my dedicated runs where I've literally reduced the rates by $1,600, and they are still on board with me because they know
Right.
I've got the consistency in there. They're rolling. They're still breaking even on that instead of hunting and searching for those. But I mean, it's not like, Jeff, you're raking me over the coals. I need to do. No, they're like, I see that. I realize that. I'd rather be moving consistently than jumping all over the place. So that's what I'm seeing, and it's tough. It really is.
Yeah, the data point that Professor Kaplis, who's from MIT and our chief data scientist, has a monthly signal report that just came out last week. And one of the things that he was advising the shipper side of our freight market consortium that we have from the large shippers was to take advantage of the inverted market and shift more loads away from routing guides, but after meeting carrier commitments. So the spot market's certainly something that's very attractive. One of the pieces of advice that he was giving, I thought it was good, was only secure contract rates on those lanes with a repeatable, consistent volume. New rates coming in are certainly down. I pulled some data points this morning that show that the active rates right now. So these are the rates in routing guides. So remember, this is about 40 billion in freight spend. So it's not the entire truckload market, but it's a decent amount of it to get a feel for where it's going. I think it's certainly representative. Active rates in routing guides continue to trend downward, but stubbornly so. Down, in the half a percent to 1% range. That's the total pool of rates in routing guides that contract freight's moving at, that flows through EDI from the shipper through TMS to the carriers. Active rates are sort of stubbornly trending downwards, but replacement rates from past RFPs for van are down about 8% compared to prior contracts and about 15% in refrigerated. So that eventually, we use the bathtub analogy. Active rates are like the temperature of the water in the bathtub. Replacement rates are the temperature of the water coming out of the spout, which of course is a lot less than the totality. But eventually the water cools, and that's what we're seeing. We think that'll happen. Our best experts, sort of economists, forecasters, think late Q1 is when we'll see this market inversion start to correct, where spot rates start to come up again. So that's I think that lines up with a lot of economic consensus. Certainly some of the smarter people and myself in the economic space that are, have a really good grasp on macroeconomics. That's what they're seeing in the market. It makes sense, I think, from a truckload perspective, because Q1's always quiet, as we've spoken about. But we typically see fairly good pickup in demand once the temperature warms up and the ground thaws. So that's sort of where we ended up. The market is still heading down. We aren't in the bottom of the cycle yet. That'll happen sometime soon. But I think the broader perspective when you widen your aperture is that we're still better than where we were before the pandemic in terms of rate per mile. But the caveat there is that everyone's operating costs are way up also. I spent $4.60 a gallon fueling up my truck the other day. That's still a chunk of change. That's a lot higher than what it was during that busy fracking boom period from, I think, 2011 through 14. It was like everybody was horrified at $4 a gallon. I know I was. But we're still around. I think we may be a little bit higher today. I'll have to look at my numbers, but a little bit higher than where we were during the Great Recession. And if I could lend your ear a little bit more, I could probably tell you exactly where we were during the Great Recession. We were at what was it? What would be the date point there? 408, 416, April 25, 2008.
Yeah.
It peaked at 477, July 14 was when it peaked in 2008. So, we're slightly below that now today, which is, always fascinating to me when you think about where we sit. If I look at my chart now, we're only just coming back down to where the worst of it was back during the Great Recession. So still not good, but what that tells you is that, it's still almost half of what it costs to run a truck these days, depending on your aerodynamics and all of your different fuel efficiency. Some of the big fleets that run, aerodynamic trucks and trailers are pulling consistent 8 miles per gallon. I can't get 6 miles per gallon or better out of my truck, loaded or empty. Doesn't matter what you put on some of these older engines, they'll always run fairly consistently at about 6 to 6.1 mpg. But these newer aerodynamic tracks that big fleets run, they are certainly doing exceptionally well when it comes to fuel efficiency, and kudos to them. There's sort of a lot of them are on the bleeding edge of that technology. But wages are, of course, a big part of that operating cost that they talk about. So everybody's operating costs are up. I don't think everybody would, and I think that's what's putting that floor in under certainly contract rates in RFP discussions. But it'll be interesting to see how that pans out this year, because at some point, rates are going to come down, and I think carriers are going to say, "Hey, diesel's still high. We can't claw back any of the wage increases that we've had to push out to drivers in the last couple of years," and that's that debate. I think there's probably a lot of carriers rebidding contracts down right now, but at some point that flattens out. You have to say enough's enough, and we're off to the races again for the next cycle.
I mean, yeah, look at when you do the negotiation, you're getting long-term contracted rates, right? The carriers, they're going to put a buffer in there to take care of the lows and the highs, so that when it gets into peak season, there's winners and losers in that contract, right? There's going to be high rates when it's low, and then low rates when it's high, and it's kind of tough. But right now, with the spot market being so low, that's so difficult when you think about it, because it's like now you got the rates going down. They're still going down, but the fuel is now starting to come up. So now, that takes a lot away from the drivers out there. I mean, how much was the fuel? I mean, let's look over I think it's the last 3 weeks I've seen some increase. What was it?
It was up 4.5 cents yesterday, but it had been coming down, Jeff. It was I can tell you exactly what it was yesterday.
New Jersey, it's going up.
Yeah, national average was 4.58. So it was up 4.6 cents this week, but it had been going down for 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the last 5 weeks, Jeff, it's come down from $4.97 to $4.69. So what's that? Yeah, so it's like 30 cents, I think. Yeah, but you're right.
Jersey.
Yeah, I know. There's a few places you've got to avoid, but that's certainly, something that shippers are probably we're somewhat happy about. Fuel surcharge national average, if you peg it at 6 miles per gallon and a baseline of 125, it's about 56 cents a mile is the fuel surcharge this week. That's a long way down from where it was.
79.81.
I got a peak of 79 back in June, 20th of June, when diesel spiked at $5.80 a gallon. So it's down almost $1 a gallon since June, but of course we've had a mild winter, especially here in the northeast. So I think the colder weather and just before Christmas might have impacted things in terms of refinery capacity and impact on demand. But who knows with this particular market? A lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense on the diesel side. But I do think that carriers are. I think the data point that we spoke about during the year was that I thought carriers were doing pretty well, had a pretty good 2021, had a reasonable 2022, despite the fact that diesel costs were high. Now, that doesn't mean carriers didn't exit the industry. Absolutely, carriers exited the industry. That, as we've talked about on the show, the carriers that would have exited were ones that paid a lot for used trucks. Were entered in a very strong market, just like we saw in the 18-19 cycle. Not hard to make really good money buying a used truck in a market like we saw in 2021 and part of 2022. Very different story when spot rates drop almost $1 per mile in the space of 6 months, which is kind of where they went from April down to where we ended the year, coming up a little bit now. But that's sort of that's a typical market cycle. The data point that I'm always fascinated with, guys, is for every carrier that leaves the industry, there are carriers coming in all the time. Now, the amount of new carriers coming in is not as high as the carriers going out. So I think we're probably seeing capacity decrease on the independent contractor side and maybe shifting back towards more of the leased on owner operator business model. And so but that's been the data point. It's not like doom and gloom. Carriers see opportunity in this industry all of the time, and I think That's the part that when I talk to carriers that kind of fascinates me is they said, so what are you seeing in the market? Well, used truck prices have come down like 50 grand compared to where we were at the start of the year. Well, but they're still like 40% higher than where they were before the pandemic. So the used truck prices are still high comparatively, but
Right.
they're down from where they were. Now, interest costs, of course, are going to determine what those payments are like. But I have operating costs, running around $1.90 a mile this week. They'll probably, if that's for a long haul owner operator, it's probably a little bit less for a large fleet. But diesel's still the big driver of operating costs for carriers right now. That hasn't changed in the last 9 months.
Hey, you know what? I was thinking about the new law that went into effect out in California, January 1st. In regards to diesel engines that were older than 2010,
10,
and I read something to the effect that the capacity is going to be reduced because of this new law by 10%. What's your take on that?
Yeah, again, who's running trucks that are 2009 and older anyway? We've known about this for 2008. This regulation was passed, I think. I think it was 2008. So this sort of sunsetting shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in California. I don't think. It certainly wasn't a surprise to a lot of us that have been watching it. What did catch me by surprise, because initially this was a drayage program where carriers that had dray trucks that were in and out of the ports consistently had to have trucks older than 2. They've expanded that. They widened it. I checked with CARB over the weekend to make sure that they extended it to everybody, and that's exactly what they've done. Any truck older than 2010, which is essentially what they're trying to pick up at the 2007, 8, and 9 engines, which had a different EPA regulation to them. I think it's interesting when you read some of the anecdotal reports and some of the media reports. Carriers are either, some of the carriers are moving out of state, moving to nearby states, getting out of the business. So capacity has to tighten. I don't know that there's any other way around this, Jeff. It seems like such a strange move, given I understand the economic benefits, the climate impact benefits and all of that. I would say that my 2003 Caterpillar engine passes all of the emission tests still to this day. So I don't buy necessarily that, I see all the data. I just think that if you have still 40 to 45% of the imports come into the San Pedro port complex, Los Angeles and Long Beach, how do you not run a business that's dependent on truckload capacity? So does that, I just think rates are going to go up, costs are going to go up, capacity is going to decrease. But it's interesting when we think about where the market cycle is right now, there is excess capacity in the market. So from a rate perspective, maybe there's minimal impact at the moment. Maybe that comes when the market capacity tightens and demand increases. But for the time being, it's kind of one of those shocking things that you think, really, that's what they're doing? But that's what they did.
That's pretty cool to think. And just coming back to what you guys talking about, like the shippers and things like that. One thing that really interested me is that I always kind of watch like Q4 or whatever quarter. I like to watch the earnings calls for different companies. One of them was Post Holdings, and they had theirs about on the unboxing day, I think on the 26th. And the CEO, Rob Vitale, said that, hey, we had a good year, but we still have supply chain issues. And he thinks for a lot of companies, his specifically, is that they're going to be looking at margin restoration. So they're going to be looking for at their supply chain to basically get their rates back to what they were probably the pre-pandemic. And when you look at like those kind of companies, Post Cereal, that's cereal, right? So that's like shelf life and different things like that. It just comes back down to what like Jeff always kind of says, like make sure you're having these conversations with your customers, right? Like if you do have Post Holdings or anything like that, call them, say, hey, what are you guys seeing from this call that kind of happened? Because we're going to see that, as Jeff kind of said, RFPs that I've done, they're pushed into February. And if we're going to be doing them in February, if they get even to that point, it's going to be like 3 to 6 months or something like that, right? Like normally for me, I go through that RFP process in October, November, do the RFI, and then finish out the RFP by December, go live January 1st. But I would say out of my 15 customers, 2 of them only did that. So everybody pushed everything till next year. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yep, absolutely.
So that's what Jeff was intimating, right? When you're talking about shippers playing, more transactional, playing more in the transactional market with that spot market decrease in rates,
Yeah,
taking advantage of that.
get
Yeah.
burned. I mean, they're going to get burned. It's like when you shrink your carrier base down, right? And now you're in a bind, and then you reach out to one of the carriers that were in your corral, and the first thing they say is, "Why should I take care of? What have you done for me
Right.
lately?" That's why
Right.
I'm adamant. If you get a carrier in place, feed them annually, all year
Right.
round.
Right.
Right. Build that loyalty with them, that partnership. It's so crucial, especially in 2023. Everybody's talking about the recession, and keep your pipeline full and keep your customers abreast of everything that's happening in the market.
Right.
You can't do that. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that do that, but it's the wrong method, at least the way I look at it. You're gonna get caught with your pants around your ankles for sure, man.
Right. Yeah, it's the we talked about this on the show before. We sort of did a survey of our shippers, and one of the things that came back, the question was, are you, shippers have memories of elephants, and
they do.
but carriers don't. But it's kind of interesting. I think some of the carriers, some of the shippers are probably more transactional than most. Certainly smaller shippers are probably more likely to be using brokerage services because they don't have enough volume to attract the bigger carriers with dedicated contract work. I think that this market will turn in the next quarter, and then we're back to where we were, through the second half of the year, which is capacity will tighten and capacity will enter the market again. Rates will start to increase. That's an inevitability that'll happen. I think that's what a lot of the bigger shippers, are seeing. Right? They're taking your advice, Jeff, and saying, yes, we acknowledge that we need to stick with our incumbent carriers who were good to us over the last few years. They've definitely awarded them. And again, this is a sort of a broad sweeping statement covering, sort of the average, but they've awarded their incumbent carriers with more volume in exchange for better rates.
Well,
And as
that's
we've
it.
said on
I
the
mean,
show,
consolidation, right? You have 10 carriers. You
right.
sit down and you agree to disagree. One of the best collaborations and partnerships that you can ever create. And tell them the way you feel. And then on vice versa, the carriers are going to tell you what they feel. And the thing is that, okay, so how can we work this together? If I give you another $1 million worth of freight, what can you do on the backside for me? And then they're going to ask you the same question, I hope. Okay, so if I do this for you, what are you going to do for me? And be able to say no. Don't think about yourselves solely. Think about everybody that's involved, your service provider, your carrier, your shipper, and make things happen. And it's very, very important to do. And a lot of them fail to do this, and it bites them in the ass. I'm sorry to say it, but it does.
Yeah. Well, you look at that too, right? Because you think of yourself as a logistics professional. As Dean kind of mentioned, more carriers are coming in as they're leaving. You're opening up yourself to exposure to double brokerage, right? Like you're getting your stuff double brokered. You don't know where your stuff is, hostage and stuff like that. Like, don't take the chance. Have like you said, if you got 10 carriers, bring them to the oak table. Decide like, hey, maybe we're gonna shrink this down to 4 or 5, and let's run with these guys, right? It's just like any kind of playbook and kind of run it, because if you go on LinkedIn, you kind of go anywhere, double brokering is such a big thing right now, and it's just you just
you
can't
got to put Ryan, you've got to put procedures in there. Okay, so the thing is, I've always said this: I don't fire carriers; carriers fire themselves. So how do you protect yourself and minimize the risk? You find out who the carrier is. Let's say you go to carrier A, and you tender that freight to A. Okay, you know who A is. You tell the customer A is coming in. If B shows up,
let me know.
If B shows up, done. I mean, you got to put procedures in there. Name of the driver, trailer number, MC number on the side of the truck. I mean, I can keep on going on and on and on. But you can fend off these double brokering if you put the right procedures in place and you ask the right questions. You can do that.
Yeah. It's a good point, Jeff. We deal with it every day, right? So it's an ongoing battle. We're always working with the authorities to try and deal with the people that want to take advantage of others in the marketplace. It seems to be very prominent when the market gets into a state like it is now. when capacity is tight, it's always there, but it's one of those things that we deal with on a daily basis.
Well, and share that information with your competitors, your associates, your friends in the
Right.
business, because you're helping them to protect themselves as well. I mean, it's a small community, even though the logistics community is so large. And I'll just use this as an example. Cassandra Gaines, right? She happened to put out an MC number of a carrier that was definitely double brokering. Okay. Well, Cassandra has a lot of following. The carrier realized and saw what she posted, and she started getting hammered with really bad DMs all the time. But whose fault is that? It's not Cassandra. She's calling a spade a spade. It's the carrier's fault for doing what they did. Should they get called out? You're damn straight they should get called out, and I back that up.
Yeah.
Dean, I want to get your thoughts on maybe we can give little thoughts, but I know the CEO of CH Robinson, he stepped down. I believe it was earlier this week, and I believe he was there since like 1999, I believe. And when I was reading the press release, they were saying like, hey, just wasn't like the sales numbers weren't just there. Any kind of thoughts on CH Robinson, as they're kind of obviously the big elephant in the room?
I don't. They're one of our biggest customers. I mean, they're one of everybody's biggest customers, I guess, depending on where you sit. But I don't think it's any surprise that the brokerage side of the business declined in the last year. We've seen it on our market. I mean, our spot market volumes are down, as I said, about 40% year over year. So that would have affected some of those bigger companies. I think the bigger picture is it's not just CH Robinson, right? We're seeing this whiplash effect across all industries. And I don't know the CEO personally, so I can't really comment on what happened there. But I see the same thing happening everywhere, not everywhere, but in lots of big companies whether it be companies like Peloton, right, who rode that wave of the pandemic with all of those sales, and then suddenly the wheels fell off literally, and then we've got to retool and come up with new creative ways to sell stuff. Lots of companies, I think, got caught up in that, and of course a lot of carriers did, right? They entered the industry when times were great. And then, of course, when things got tougher, then you had to re-engineer your business to find better ways to make margins because the demand wasn't there. But what had happened, you'd geared up to a much higher level of demand that suddenly disappeared. And I think that's what's happening to a lot of companies. If you think about, we've gone from a staffing shortage, people getting offered, in the technology space, double the salary they were getting. We've saw it at our company. Especially in the Pacific Northwest, where there's a lot of high tech companies. We've gone from people leaving to, double the salary because there was such a shortage of people, to a reversion back to normal now, where that sort of disappeared. And of course, then you saw over the holidays, a lot of staff cuts. And so more to come, I think, on that space. I think there's a lot of companies that have seen demand fall away, but more likely back to where they were pre-pandemic levels, but they've got excess capacity in their businesses that they've got to deal with. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality.
Yeah, reality. It's crazy to think about it. Like you look at every like you said, Peloton is probably like the biggest one. You look at Tesla too. Things are just definitely changing, especially in the software game as well. But it kind of comes down to, like Jeff always kind of talks about, like bet on yourself. If this is the opportunity, like when you see things changing, instead of working for somebody else, work for yourself. Maybe try that out. And as you kind of said, a lot of carriers are kind of going that independent model for themselves, right? So they're able to kind of go with that. So thanks for that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. And that's great insight.
Yeah. I don't know. I think everybody's going through a rationalization period right now. Every single company that we talk to, whether it's carriers are, one of the things we're talking to carriers about right now is cost control, finding out better ways to manage costs. It's going to be hard to grow your top line for the next 4 to 5 months for sure. The only way you can maintain your margins is through cost control, being more creative, changing your business model. So again, just like everybody's been caught up in sort of gearing up for much higher levels of demand in 2021, and then it sort of reverts back to normal. You've suddenly got to rethink about how you run your business. Carriers are looking for, running different lanes. There's also more technology available today that allows you to explore different options in the market. That's not something we've seen before. One of the bigger trends, of course, is this, the shift in imports to the East Coast. That's certainly sustaining itself right now. That's causing a lot of carriers to re-engineer their networks to position their assets in places where there's more volume. The old adage of go west, young man is sort of. I remember a headline in 2018, like someone said, "Go west," and I thought the rates were phenomenal out of the West Coast, but not now. So
yeah, I mean, you're starting to see that these carriers are starting to open up new offices out in the East Coast. I mean, like you said, they're going where the freight is.
Right.
And then what's the impact of all these dray carriers out there in the port of LA, LB, who are having this impact because they're not having the volumes that they used to have out there where they were just constantly going. So I wonder how many have fallen off the side there. I mean, there's a huge swing, massive swing.
Yeah. Cool. Interesting start to the year. Yep,
definitely has. And yesterday we had Scott Watanabe from Armstrong Transport Group talking to us about training. And with Jeff and I, we want to kind of keep basically a theme going. So even tomorrow and Friday, we're going to kind of talk about. But when it comes to training, and for everybody that's watching, Dean, is there there's going to be, but what are some certain markets that you see that are possibly going to flourish maybe in 2023 a little bit more if somebody's kind of starting from a baseline of, hey, I'm just brand new and I kind of want to get my foot in. I know we talk niches a lot, but let's talk about geographical regions.
What's hot and what's not.
There we go. We'll call that what's hot.
I think one of the data points that stood out to me last week, I mean, broadly, there were only 2 states out of the lower 48 where rates decreased, everywhere else increased. So, but the data point that stood out to me, and I'll quickly pull up the data here. So California is not going to be the market that it used to be in terms of spot market volume, but the other data point was flatbed. So flatbed. So first of all, I'll start with reefer, right? So I'll come back to dry van. One of the things that's been very interesting is an increase in volumes across the southern border of refrigerated freight. So I would, so specifically Ryan, Laredo, McAllen markets in the southern Texas area, especially, you're just going to see more loads of avocados than you could ever imagine start to come across the border leading into Super Bowl. The primary market for avocados coming across is the far Texas crossing. So again, thinking about seasonality, produce seasons change. Two markets that stand out to me for reefer carriers over the winter, Philadelphia, where you get a lot of South American produce, and McAllen and maybe Laredo to a degree, but more likely McAllen for produce. Laredo so last week, capacity Laredo to Chicago last week. And this is what we said on our last show of the year. Carriers that decided to run last week probably did pretty well, right? Because their capacity was tight. A lot of guys at home. Yeah. A lot of guys stay out because that's when they can make some money. Rates jumped $1.18 a mile. Laredo to Chicago, reefer, $1.18 a mile, increase to $3.12. It was 40 cents a mile higher than this time last year. So even outbound Chicago rates were up 30 cents a mile week over week, and some good value for other carriers. But so the southern border market is one I'd watch. Texas in particular seems to be a market that's pretty good for dry van and reefer and flatbed. And the data point that I wanted to share with you to answer your question specifically in flatbed, flatbed rates in Houston increased 31 cents a mile to $2.61 last week. Salt Lake City up to $2.69. Even loads out to the Permian Basin were about $2.80 a mile. Remember, these are excluding fuel. So these are a lot higher than the national average rates. High volume lane, Houston to Fort Worth, rates are running about $2.50 a mile. That's the lowest in the last 12 months. But the state of Texas has been a really strong state for flatbed carriers. Reefer carriers in particular, because you see a lot of Central American reefer freight comes into the port of Houston. Well, your bananas, plantains, things like that. And then you get a lot of South American produce coming in. So I think Houston's always going to be a very good market for carriers. It always has been. But as we've discussed on the show, this west to east shift in imports because
yeah.
of the port congestion. A lot of that volume is sticking in ports like Houston and Mobile, Houston in particular. So, Ryan, I think markets that are really hot that I'd be watching this year in particular would be, Texas. It's always been a really strong spot market, but Texas in particular, because of the imports that are sort of coming in, not just containerized, but break bulk.
Yeah.
So freight that's not in containers. That's why we saw so much flatbed volume, although that volume is starting to decline. And then, of course, following on from that trend, I would watch smaller markets. I would, if I was sort of in the drayage or long haul drayage space or looking for, volume that was around ports, places like Norfolk, Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk in particular, as we discussed on the show, where they've just dredged their harbour, Charleston, sorry, to 52 feet. A lot of big ships are going to be coming in there. When you start to see ports, dredge harbours, put more ship to shore cranes, what that means is you're going to have bigger ships, and I wonder about whether the bigger ships that are coming in, sort of overwhelm the infrastructure with a sudden surge at one point in time, as opposed to 4 or 5 ships that are smaller.
It may happen.
So again, what we saw, the reason I say that is, and I don't know the answer to the question, we'll have to see how that pans out, but with the surge in imports into Los Angeles last year, when we saw 109 ships at anchor waiting to unload, that volume that was surging into that port market in that small, tiny footprint of the the country, it overwhelmed all of the contract capacity, intermodal, truckload, right? So it just overwhelms, and a lot of that volume spilled over into the spot market, and that's why spot market rates were so strong out of Los Angeles for the best part of last year and early this year, was because the volumes were overwhelming the market that was just surging into that part of the country. Of course, now we've got the opposite happening now, but that's where I'd watch some of those port markets. The markets that we talked about last year, Seattle, Tacoma, volumes have come right down there. So those rates are coming back down commensurate with that. So I think dry van, I'd watch some of those port markets where there's been a coastal shift. And again, Texas for reefer carriers is going to be, and flatbed is going to be pretty good markets to watch.
Yeah, New York is going up.
Yeah, their import, they're still the number one. Yep, number one port.
Well, and that's the whole thing. I've always said about, looking at the what if scenarios. If they happen to come to fruition, how are you going to respond? What are you going to put in place, if that happens? And I say it all the time. I think everybody out there should be looking at those what if scenarios to prepare. It doesn't take that much time to do it. It's like, okay, now I can hit that toggle switch and we're off and ready to go, instead of saying, oh, we got to think about this now, play it out.
Right. That's kind of hearing. It's good to know that, because for people knowing that Texas is a great place for all the agents and all the sales reps, you do not have to do cow hides. Say no to the cow hides out of Texas. There's a lot more freight out there that you can do. As we're kind of talking about the ports, Dean, and Jeff, because I know you're a rail guy too. Is there any talks? Do you see any disruptions on the rails? Has that stuff been resolved? I know that's kind of been back and forth and a topic of discussion on the show specifically for the past couple of months. But any info you both can share?
Well, I could tell you one thing right now that just recently, a couple of days ago, Snyder contracted with the UP to handle all their business up there, which is really good. I mean, am I a Snyder guy? I am, because I work for them. They're a great company. They're doing some good stuff. They always have.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anywhere near the level of disruption that we were talking about in September and then more recently. So the other thing, though, I was reading a post by Larry Gross, who's probably one of the best experts on the intermodal space. So this is the American Association of Railroads.
Scott.
I used to hate hauling cowhides. We call them stinkers in Australia.
Yeah,
they're awful.
He would tell his carriers that it's like leather, so they probably think that, hey, oh my god, it's ready, it's the finished product, and when they get there,
no,
like, oh my god.
Hey, at least we know.
Oh, there he is. He said it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. At least we know what Scott's moving.
Yeah, but you never want, none of the authorities ever wanted to pull you over and check your load when you had stinkers on, because you got blood and guts running out of the steel bins they were in. God, it was awful. The
It's
smell.
terrible.
Oof.
It's
That's
terrible.
like get in and go as fast as you can because you don't want this thing catching up with you.
Well,
So Larry Gross,
I won't be moving any of that stuff. You can count on
Yeah,
that.
Scott, you can have it. You can have it, man. That's
You
all
can
you.
have it.
You corner that market.
It's all yours, Scott.
So to answer your question, Ryan, AAR, so the American Association of Railroads, put out their weekly traffic report every Tuesday. I think it's available publicly Wednesday, but there's for the week ending Sunday, I think, published Tuesday for week 50, according to Larry Gross in his LinkedIn posts. If you're not following him, Lawrence Gross is a really good guy. Volumes are down 7.5% year over year on the intermodal side. So that's a significant number. He said, when was the last time the average number of intermodal loads originated in weeks 46 through 50 was that low? He said 2012. So intermodal volumes are certainly lower. And I think that's, you could probably say that's a good thing because it allows people some breathing space to catch up and get some of those containers that have been sitting in the backlog moved through the system, some of those chassis trailers that have been tied up, recirculating again. We'll have to see how that pans out. So there certainly hasn't been any impact, Ryan, from the legislation that was forced on the workers to go back to work and not strike and accept the agreement that was proposed in 2020. So nothing yet, but volumes are decreasing, which probably decreases the probability that we'll have any problems there, notwithstanding some of the weather impacts that could happen over winter with the rail lines.
I wonder, and I don't have these numbers, maybe you do. When we were talking a couple months ago, Dean, about the warehouse capacity, and they were well in the high 90s, like 99.5, and they were trying to, if not higher, trying to move their products out to market. I wonder how the intermodal market was, because listen, it's a longer transit time than your typical OTR. And I wonder if they swung to that, to give them a couple more days of transit time so they can deplete some more inventory to stock it up, compared to your normal OTR. I'm just curious about what those numbers are. Do you know what they are?
I don't. No, I don't. That's a question I'll have to take on notice.
Yeah. I'm just curious, especially on the supply chain. Listen, they don't need it just like that, right? Because they're over capacity. Why wouldn't you want to stall it a little bit and put it on the rail and gain a couple extra days?
It's a great point.
It's not like just in time. You don't need it.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to hide some freight if you haven't got warehouse space for a while. It's going to take forever. I was just pulling up the Logistics Managers Index December report to see if I could see some numbers about warehouse utilization levels, to see if they've come back down 12. I can't. It would take too long for me to find it. But warehouse utilization.
We can do that next week. Yeah,
it's certainly. Yeah, that's probably a good topic to cover. Like the LMI has got some good data points because it's a survey of a lot of the logistics professionals in the CSCMP group of supply chain managers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think that would be a good topic. I'm just curious about that.
Well, that's actually a good point, Jeff, because Zach will have his December report. He should have a report out this week, actually. So unless he's been away, we should have some pretty good data coming up shortly on that. Yep. Well, maybe this is the latest. Yeah.
And that's why we got the show, to give those data points. Dean, we're coming up to close to, it's actually Year of the Rabbit in the Chinese astrology, and Chinese New Year is actually hitting on the 22nd of this month. I always thought it was like February, but it's 22nd. I know with us, we're seeing the increase because we ship lobsters from the Atlantic to Toronto to go to China. What kind of impacts do normally and this is for like the training mindset here. What impacts does Chinese New Year kind of have on our supply chain, if they do at all?
Good question.
It's typically on the ports. That's why we see a low point in imports each March, typically, right? So, but this year is a little bit different. And for those that don't know, Chinese New Year is typically a 1-week celebration, bookended by a week either side, where people travel home and then travel back to work. So it's typically a 3-week event that sort of bookends the 1-week celebration. And because folks are going back to visit family, and a lot of family lives in rural areas in China. It's a fairly decent, transit. They've got to get back there. So that's why they allow the time. The difference this year is that, and it could have a more profound impact on import volumes, is the COVID outbreak they're experiencing right now. Simply could mean they extend that 3 week to maybe 5 or 6 weeks. So people could be already at home now because the factories are, having issues with production. Again, I don't have any hard data to support that, but that was one of the data points that some contacts of mine in China said that they were working on, was that this year's 3 week traditional break will be a lot longer. The flip side is that because of the COVID outbreak, people could just stay working and not go outside. I don't know. I think they've relaxed some of those restrictions this year. So generally what happens is that's why imports are very quiet. And then if you think about a 21-day transit time minimum from Northern Asia to the US West Coast, you'll start to see, once the Chinese New Year period is over, you'll see within about 2 to 3 weeks, the imports start to pick up. So if you look at the seasonality of imports over the course of multiple years, you'll always see a dip in the March timeframe, and then they pick up again through peak season.
Oh, that's beautiful. So everybody's kind of listening out there, definitely take that in and have those conversations, because
Right.
we always kind of see, and even the carrier aspect of it too, like you're gonna see a lot of like the Asian carriers, they're gonna take it off, either they're going back home
Right.
or they're just taking it off to celebrate, because it's a pretty big holiday.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to some of the local truckers that we see with certain cultures, right? Some don't celebrate Christmas, some are celebrating Christmas right now. Some are New Year's a different celebration.
All different kinds. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very much aware of that.
Of course, well, we got a couple minutes, so let's have a little bit of fun here. No, let's put up our feet a little bit. But like, what did you get up to on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, Dean?
So I was consistent. The last time I saw midnight on New Year's Eve was 1982, and I was sound asleep. I think I was asleep by 8 o'clock. So the last time I celebrated New Year's Eve, there was a lot of fighting and drinking in Australia, and I said, "That's it, I'm done." So yeah, we've just moved house, so I was pretty much exhausted from moving one house into another, and multiple stairs, and my knees aren't what they used to. So I spent it resting. It's been a really busy 2 weeks for me, but. Yeah. What about you guys?
Yeah, like I don't know if it's culturally for you guys, but I don't know. I'll say this: we stayed up. It was my mom, my sister, and my wife, and we played Monopoly. But I don't know if it's the same for you guys. We cannot play Monopoly in our family because it always ends in a fight. Someone thinks someone's cheating the banker. Like I'm not allowed to be the banker. I don't cheat, by the way, but it always ends in a fight for some reason.
That's where the truth comes out.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
From there. But I just spent it. What about you, Jeff?
I've always stayed up. I mean, I'm the type of guy that needs maybe 5 or 6 hours of sleep at night, so I haven't missed one ball drop in all my years, maybe when I was a little guy, but I would never, ever would I ever go to New York City to watch that ball drop. I'm still baffled how these guys can go there at 7 o'clock in the morning to be up front. And then they don't leave until 1 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get home. The restaurants in Times Square are not going to let you go in and use their bathroom. So how are they doing it? Are they all wearing Depends like old people? I mean,
So Jeff, we used to live in 2003. We lived on 7th Avenue, and so we were not far from Times Square. My 21st floor apartment looked right at Times Square. So being new to this country, that whole New Year's Eve thing in Times Square was just bizarre to us. People were there early in the morning in the gated areas because they gated off each block, and they stood there all day. Yeah, so I think they had to be wearing something because they weren't leaving.
It depends on multiple wears. I'm telling you right now, there's no.
Not drink their water bottle. It's not pineapple juice, friends. It's
unless they're extremely dehydrated by 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I understand that,
Well, so there's contrast, Ryan. Jeff hasn't missed a New Year's Eve, and I can't get to bed soon enough.
Yeah. Well, to answer Scott's question, I was born in 1988. Christmas Day,
Right.
1988. So no,
Right.
I wasn't.
Brian born yet.
It
Wow.
was a lot of fun. But is there any kind of traditional stuff? I know like you're in bed and things like that, but
Mm.
even for Christmas, because I know we didn't talk to you for Christmas, Dean.
Yeah.
Any traditional
Yeah.
items that you guys make? I know you made your
No,
meringue for that meeting and things like that, but
we have a so we don't have any family here, right? So,
yeah, that's fine.
Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve. So we don't, it's kind of just a small family affair. My wife's in Australia this year, so I don't, we sort of, it was just particularly quiet. My boys are skiing. So it was just me and the two Labradoodles, right? Which luckily they don't talk. So it was actually a pretty good, it was a pretty good recovery period. But here's what we do
Ooh.
that's different. This is what we do that's different, right? So I'm a hardwired introvert. I recharge my batteries with quietness. That's why I love driving my truck and putting on the radio. What we do though, that's a little bit different, is because New Year's Eve and Christmas is celebrated in Australia earlier. For example, at 8 a.m. On Christmas Eve, Australians are celebrating midnight. Right, so we get to watch it. We FaceTime with our family, and it's the same on Christmas. So we get to live sort of in a southern hemisphere celebratory mode, where when it's freezing cold here, we're watching people, drink beer, swim in the pool, and play cricket, which is kind of a
Nice.
that's how we celebrate a little bit differently. It's just a little bit unusual, but that's how it's been.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. What about you, Jeff? Like any kind of, I know you kind of mentioned a little bit, but
Yeah, just relax,
Yeah.
just the families, sitting back, having a couple beers, watching football, opening up presents, just something normal, nothing out of the ordinary,
Right.
and it's
Right.
it's nice to have that downtime, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is.
We all
Yeah.
need to re-energize ourselves, and
Yep.
what best family to do that with,
Mm.
so
yeah, it was awesome kind of see. I used that last week, like to kind of like recharge myself. And last year, I took that week to watch Harry Potter for the first time, like all 7 movies,
Ah,
and I was like, oh my
right.
god, like this is cool.
Wow.
And this year, I like did
Yeah.
like Lord of the Rings,
Right.
so I think like nothing really kind of happens during that week. I know like
Mm.
it went by too fast for me. Like my
Mhm.
wife was
always
home, and I
does,
was,
always
but
does.
last week was slow. But I was like, when you wake up and you're like, what day is it? Is it Monday? Is it Tuesday? Like, what's going on?
Wait a second, you're not that old. You're not that
Yeah.
old to say
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. What's that?
Man.
Maybe because I'm just not in the office, just up
Oh
in the
my
bedroom, things
god.
like that. But
That's funny.
Dean, want to ask you one question before we actually get going here. Any kind of conferences, anything planned for this year for yourself to be doing any kind
Yeah.
of guest speaking?
Yeah, I've got a really interesting project on with Great West Casualty Company. I'm speaking at 5 of their regional conferences where all the big truckload carriers that they insure come in. I'm
Nice.
off to Phoenix, Arizona at the end of this month. Off to visit OTR Solutions, our factoring partner, next week in Atlanta to talk to all of their staff about trucking, operating cost, industry viability. Stiefel Research, their big analyst conference is on in February just out on an island just off Jacksonville. I'm looking forward to that one because I expect it'll be very cold here in Boston. Stiefel Research. So yeah, it's going to be a busy year. I think I'm looking forward to it. Although I never look forward to travel, the actual physical travel piece. But I'm looking forward to getting out and meeting some folks
Nice.
again.
It's awesome. So thanks so much for that, Dean. Jeff, I know tomorrow is a big day for you. In the afternoon, can you talk a little bit about Hold My Beer?
Yeah. So we are relaunching Hold My Beer. It hasn't been out there for a while, so it's going to relaunch at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be a good show. We definitely have a lot of ad hoc. It's real. It's live, and we discuss a lot of things. So those who have not seen Hold My Beer, I strongly suggest that you tune in and watch. A lot of fun, a lot of discussions. And I'm glad that I was asked to be part of the crew there. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
So 4:30 tomorrow. Where is it going to be?
Hold My Beer.
Yeah.
The podcast. It's going to be on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the major media out there. So so tune in.
Awesome.
We'll send out an invite to everybody.
Okay.
All right, it's gonna be amazing. You know, it's just like this is the year of like kind of like doing different things and kind of putting yourself out there more. So, Dean, want to thank you so much. It's
Thank
always a
you.
pleasure to have you on. I know
Yeah,
I get
thanks,
a lot
Dean.
of messages about like, I learned so much from Dean, and thank you so much for like going with the training part as we're kind of keeping that with the theme this week.
Right.
So a lot
Yeah.
of new agents or even there somebody trying to try different new, trying to find a different niche, they can kind of look into these markets of what's hot and what's not, right? So I
Mhm.
want to thank everybody else for coming out this morning. We'll hit the replay again at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern time. It will be on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Come out for tomorrow as we're keeping that training theme, as Jeff and I will go ad hoc as we always do and have some fun.
Totally.
And then, Dean, we'll see you next week.
See you
Everybody
next week,
stay
guys.
safe.
Thank
And
Yeah.
you.
let's
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a
Okay.
great day.
Bye bye.